Welcome everybody to this very special webinar. Today we're going to be having a panel with three wonderful data visualization experts, and we've titled the session, Leading Voices, Women in Data in the Frame of International Women's Day, which we celebrated last Friday. This is part of the ongoing efforts within Flourish to showcase various voices in the world of data visualization and to also contribute to the conversation around gender equality in the tech space and in the data visualization space. Now, without further ado, let's meet our guests, three wonderful professionals that are joining us today. We're going to start with Miriam. Miriam explores diverse ways of communicating data, including data sonification. She is a journalist, a musician, and an author, and she's one half of the Loud Numbers Studio and the co-author of the award-winning book, I'm a Portal to the Universe, which I highly recommend. I read it and I absolutely loved it. It's a great kids' book about data and how to introduce kids to the world of data. We have Naledi, who is a data visualization specialist with a background in social research, who applies research methods and psychology principles to solve real-world problems. She works as a freelance consultant, working primarily with non-for-profits, where she uses data visualization to help organizations create change through data-driven insights, communicate research findings to the right audience, and raise awareness on important issues. And finally, we have Lyndsey, who is the head of data visualization enablement here at Flourish, and she works to empower our customers to realize the full value of Flourish and Canva for their needs. Before her time here in Flourish, she worked as a data visualization editor at the Bank of England. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being part of today's panel. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. So there we go. So we can have our lovely conversation here today. As I mentioned, people, please ask your questions over in the Q&A and we'll take care of them at some point during our chat. But to get us started, my first question to all of you, and I'd like each of you to answer this individually, is to give us a quick flavor how you got started with data visualization and how you ended up at your current role. So according to my screen, Miriam, if we can get started with you.
Sure. It's funny to be going first because I feel like I might have the most unconventional story to tell, but we'll see. So I started off in data visualization actually through music, which is not a common route. I did a PhD in musicology at King's College London after doing an undergraduate degree in music. And as part of my PhD, I got quite interested in data visualization, in actually taking data from music recordings on things like timing and duration and turning that data into charts. So this was a kind of a wing of my PhD that I was sort of slightly interested in. And then after I finished my PhD, I decided I didn't want to go into academia. And I started working as a researcher for David McCandless, who authored the book Information is Beautiful, and it still runs the website informationisbeautiful.net. So kind of fell into it by accident, really loved working for David. You know, I really enjoyed getting my teeth into lots of different topics. I got kind of more familiar with data visualization, but through a research angle rather than a design angle, though I was always working with the designers. Then Information is Beautiful started as a studio, which is now called Beyond Words Studio, a really fantastic data viz studio based in London. And I started working for them quite regularly. Then I branched out to working for the BBC and other people. I got increasingly interested during this time in not just data visualizations, but also turning data into artworks, things like kind of, I guess, visual artworks, also physical objects, things like necklaces. I worked very regularly with the designer Stephanie Posavec, who's also a very good friend of mine. And we wrote the book that you mentioned earlier, which is called I'm a Portal to the Universe, which is a book that's kind of infused with the data, like every dimension of the book embodies a statistic or a fact or a number. I also worked for a while for Data for Change, who are an absolutely brilliant non-profit who work with organizations across the world to help them make the most of their data, particularly people working in the global south. And then in 2021, Duncan Gear and I released our podcast, which is called Loud Numbers, which is a data sonification podcast. So I guess I've come full circle in a way, starting with sound and music and coming back to sound and music and trying to bring the two together. And that kind of I guess it's a fertile creative ground between data and other things, whether that's visualizations, artworks, physical objects, or or sound, that's where I'm really interested in exploring, how can we visualize, how can we explore representing data in new ways, new and exciting formats.
Amazing. And Naledi, you're next in my screen. Can we go with you?
Yes, thanks. So I came from a social research background, and I always saw myself more on the survey creation and maybe experimental setup side, because I never liked maths, and I thought the analytics side of it would just be way too complicated for me, and I didn't trust myself with that. And when I started my first full-time job at Leicestershire County Council, I was first introduced to the data visualization side of things, and I sort of started as in the area of survey design and some qualitative analysis, and just got really excited about the data visualization part. And when that contract was over, I started at the Data School in London. So the Data School is an amazing program which lasts 2.5 years with the Information Lab in London, based in London. So we have a few different schools now across the world, and they basically teach you everything you need to know about data visualization and analysis. So started off with 4 months of just classroom teaching with 7 other people, doing client projects, learning everything about Alteryx and Tableau, and then going into client placements with different companies for 6 months each. So did that, and afterwards sort of went off into my career, worked a little bit for a charity called Operation Fistula, and then started working for UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme. And it was there really that I was starting to migrate more into a strategic role, and realized that that's very much not what I want to be doing. I really enjoy creating visualizations, and that's what I'm good at. And so we decided that I would instead become a contractor for the same team. So now I still work for UNDP, but in a more hands-on creative role, but also work for other clients at the same time in a freelance capacity.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And Lyndsey, can you tell us a little bit more about your journey?
Yes, of course. So I'm an economist by background, and from the moment I opened my economics A-level textbook and saw a chart about demand and supply, I was just fascinated with visual communication and how much I can explain or learn through just a couple of charts versus chapters and chapters of theory or economic theory. So this really was the beginning of my journey. Economics, I loved the subject. I studied it at degree and master's level, and then I did not want to be an accountant. So one of the main places to go as an economist is the Government Economic Service. So I joined the civil service. I loved my time there, worked in the Department of Work and Pensions, and then started to get a bit bothered by politics affecting rational economic decisions based on analysis. So left and went to the Bank of England and joined the data and statistics team there, which was really, really interesting. It was just at a time when the Bank of England was grappling with an explosion in big data and collecting lots of data from lots of financial institutions. And that's where I started to explore visual analytics and using visual analytics to find patterns in massive data sets. And so I think I've always just been a very visual person. I don't like algebra equations, reading lots. And there I found Tableau, a BI tool that made it very easy to do visual analytics. And I slowly started to teach myself that, learn much more about the field of visual analytics, moved into the advanced analytics team in the Bank of England, where I was the only woman in that team, and then realized that analysis is amazing. I love it. But it doesn't really pack a punch unless it's communicated well. And it doesn't fulfill the need until someone tells a story from it, makes someone care about it, helps inform a decision, makes someone act on it. And we were just drowning in data and analysis. And so I just decided I'm going to focus down now on communication and visual communication with data. And so I started using Flourish at the Bank of England. I moved into the comms department there. I loved it. And then I thought I'm going to bite the bullet and leave the public sector after 20 years to join this small tech startup. And I've not looked back since. So it's been an amazing journey, much more analytical and data heavy in the beginning. And now I get to work with people that are more in the more creative sphere, the more communication sphere. And yeah, so that's how I got here.
Amazing. I love to hear that these are such different stories. Like each of you come from like a completely different branch and like way of life. So that's always encouraging to see, I guess, for people also getting started as well, seeing that you all landed in a very similar, I guess, place from the
Yeah.
data visualization aspect, but from various backgrounds. Now, as I mentioned at the very beginning, obviously the session is framed around International Women's Day and Women's History Month, that is March. So I wanted to ask you whether you have faced any challenges in the field, especially as women, and if you can give us examples as to what those challenges were and how you overcame them. Anybody can jump into that. Yeah.
I'm happy to start. So it's really interesting. So I did not really notice that I was in the minority for most of my career in the economic service. But when I joined the bank and I started specializing much more in analytics and data and advanced analytics, you definitely notice there's much fewer women in the field. I don't know why this is, because it doesn't start off like that. It seems that people move away or fall away over time. And actually it wasn't a challenge. I kind of used it to my advantage, because if you're the only woman, people kind of use you as a sounding board for things like interview panels or job descriptions, or so in a way it was quite interesting to see how being in only women in a male dominated team, like how people would look for your insight into how can we get more women into our teams and this field. But I have noticed that when something is very male dominated, women are not attracted to it. So how do we counter this? Like how do we make sure that our teams are very, like, our gender have equal genders? I suppose it's just a hard question. I don't think it comes from, I really think it's something more cultural. I think it's about the culture of the company or the team. I haven't noticed there being less women in data and analytics in general. It just seems to be certain areas or teams where, and then as soon as I moved to comms, all the women were there. All the women were in communications. They're still economists and analysts, but they're just not in this heavy analytical worlds. So then I'm like, is it the topic, or is it just you're attracted to working with people that are like you? And so if there's not anyone there that you can kind of see yourself in, you tend to keep away. So that's why it's really important to have mixed genders on interview panels, or make sure you check your job adverts are not, leading or written in a certain way to put people off. And yeah, so that's the challenge. I noticed it was more at the recruitment stage, and it was women just weren't applying because jobs, I don't know, that just the way they were being marketed or described weren't appealing to them.
Very, very interesting. Miriam, Naledi, if you want to jump in.
I wonder how much of sort of what I was initially saying about not being confident in my mathematical skills plays into that. And I was really grateful to my manager at Leicestershire County Council, who was the one who told me about the data school. And I was really interested in the program and had a lot of doubts about if this was something that I could use in the charity sector, but also if my skills were good enough, if I was analytical enough. And he took the time to sort of really reassure me. And I think the the interesting thing about data visualization is that it is a lot of communication, and that's really where I see myself. I was teaching, so I teach at the university level. I teach workshops, which is actually one of the things that is an interesting experience in terms of not just being a woman, but also looking quite young. So I'm very frequently mistaken for a student when I show up, and it can very much feed into the imposter syndrome that I think we tend to have anyway. But one of the students asked me, you know, how much statistics do I use in my everyday job? And there's really not much. I think most of the time in any of the placements that I was in, it's mostly about just getting an overview of the data and sort of past maybe figuring out when to use a median. You know, we're not doing t-tests or ANOVAs or all the things that I learned when I was studying psychology. So one thing that I wanted to say is that I've noticed a big difference working in the charity sector. I frequently have calls about data that are just full of women, that are just women. We'll have both on the client side and, you know, I don't see the same gender divide, probably because I think there are more women that are sort of in the area of social good and charities and international organizations, from my experience. And previously I was working for a charity focusing on women's health as well. So it was a very nice change from where I was before in the sort of, private sector. My worst experience was during one of my placements, where it was very clear that my two colleagues that were on my team, there's a lot of, I think, a sense of competition for them with the way that sort of this team had been set up. And they weren't happy with the fact that I was there. And a lot of comments were aimed at me being sort of them thinking that I was quite young. And I think the moment when it became most apparent to me was when somebody asked them what our team does. And one of them said, well, the two of us, we analyze data and Naledi makes it pretty. And I sort of had to say, you do realize that I actually, first of all, communicate results to the rest of the organization, because whatever, you know, it doesn't matter how good your analysis is. If the decision makers don't understand it, it's absolutely useless. And there was a terrible meeting that we had where, because it was a placement, and I was going to be done after 6 months, they were talking about what skills to look for in a new hire. And they were listing all these things that, like, you know, they should definitely know how to use Python and they should do this and that. And they're all skills that I didn't have, but I'd been doing this job for 6 months successfully. And I was fuming, and this was with the CEO, and I was fuming, and I came out of it and I walked into his office and was like, can we have a talk? I said, you know, I see and I know that the team doesn't respect me. I have gone to seek support from the information lab for this, and they've been very supportive. I just need to know if you're happy with my work, because you're the one who hired me.
Yeah.
You know, I'm doing this placement with you. No matter what they think of me, I just want to sort of see if you think I'm doing the job. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. Like, that meeting was terrible and they didn't behave appropriately at all. But, you know, in the end, there wasn't much. I did sort of go to various sources for support, and sort of various things were done. It never really resolved itself. But for me, kind of just reminding myself of whose opinion is important in this situation, and that their opinion of me wasn't accurate, and probably also was influenced by things that had nothing to do with me or my skills. That sort of helped me through that, and sort of being able to contrast that with other experiences where in the next placement I went into a very supportive environment where I was really looked up to for my skills, and they had brought me in specially for my communication skills. That helped, because being in an environment where you're constantly told that you're not good enough is really difficult to sort of withstand that and continue to believe in yourself. It's not nice. It's not something that anybody wants for themselves. But I think you need to face the fact that it's probably going to happen at some point, and find out how you can deal with it.
Well, yeah, that's there's quite a lot to unpack there, but I want to hear Miriam's answer before I jump in with more questions. So Miriam, go ahead.
Yeah, and what Naledi just said about the feeling of imposter syndrome from coming from a non-technical background, that really resonated with me because, like I said, I'm from a music background. This is it's generally considered to be a humanities subject. So I had that perhaps more humanities researcher skill set when I started, and the more mathematical, more statistical, technical side took a long time to come, and you know it's still something that I'm working on, and you never stop learning. But it's definitely something that I have an aptitude for, but I didn't study to advanced degree level, so I'm therefore behind people who did. And I think I've actually been quite lucky in that I have had a very few, or I'd say almost no instances of overt discrimination on the basis of gender that I have faced in the workplace. And I think that's been partly because of being freelance and being to some extent on the outside of these things. And also, in fact, mostly because I have mainly worked with organizations who've had really great policies around gender or who have been female led. And that has contributed to it. And I think that the type of data visualization, I guess someone once described it to me as the woolly fringes of data visualization, you know, the sonification, the creative data visualization, the data artworks. That's kind of the space where I've been, rather than business analytics, dashboard, Tableau, and so on. Although I do a bit of that now as well. So that has been quite, it's a space that is largely occupied by women, I think, and in which women have been pioneering many of the most exciting approaches and new works. And many of the people I've worked with have been women, and many of the people who've headed the companies I've worked for have been women as well. And that has helped me. But I think that it's been a fairly unusual path that I've taken. And I've certainly encountered plenty of instances of discrimination outside of work. And, you know, in the music sphere, you know, we've had people assuming that I didn't do the sound design on the sonifications we've made. We've had people on Twitter, people on Twitter assuming that I don't know what I'm talking about. That it's everywhere. But I think with my experience of data visualization, the people I've worked with, it's been very, very muted. So I think I've been lucky. And, you know, I think data designers, people who work in data viz, are generally quite good. In my experience is that people are generally great people. I think I'm lucky to work in this field.
It's really interesting what you said, Miriam, about not actually experiencing anything obvious. I think a lot of the things are just very subtle. Like if I think back, I think I've never had a female manager. In 20 years, I've never had a female manager. Like that seems quite crazy now I look back on it. And so there is some bias going on there, but it's not in your face. It's just it's kind of you've accepted it. And not even really noticed. And it's kind of interesting because I don't experience that now where I am in Flourish. So I see there's lots of women managers. So it's something culturally, I think maybe where I've worked in the past. And again, I didn't notice that so much in government, but definitely in the Bank of England, in finance, in data, statistical organizations, there's a noticeable absence of women in higher up positions. So something is happening that is stopping women being promoted or moving up or progressing. And it's kind of interesting to explore what that is. Is it these like biases about your ability, or it's kind of interesting.
I wanted to ask you guys about leadership particularly, but because you've touched on imposter syndrome, I wonder, I mean, the three of you are quite accomplished professionals. I mean, you even have like an international scope to a certain extent. You work with clients across the world and very renowned ones. Do you still feel imposter syndrome? Like, do you still get those doubts about whether your skills are enough? And if so, how do you shut that up, or like how do you manage to cope with it?
I certainly do. I mean, not as much as I used to, but I do, and I'd always kind of put that down to the fact that what I do is quite diverse. It's quite spread across many different areas where, you know, you couldn't have the skills to excel in all of these areas. So I've often been kind of the unicorn in the middle trying to do everything. But of course, that's kind of the wrong way to look at it. And I think that what I've learned is that collaborating with people is so essential. And some of the collaborations I've had with people, particularly with women, have really helped me to kind of overcome that idea that everything is on my shoulders and I ought to be able to do everything and have all the skills, because of course nobody does. And that helps you overcome the imposter syndrome. But to be honest, also it's just sheer bloody mindedness. I think you just have to kind of get on and do it and ignore the voice in your head and just carry on, do the project anyway. And if it scares you, then that's great. It's probably a sign that you're challenging yourself and pushing your skills forward. So I try to take it as a good sign now if I'm kind of scared of a project and I think, oh, I can't do it, because I probably can.
I'm not really sure if it can ever go away. I don't know if there's like a point where I won't feel like this anymore. And it's funny that you say that, because I all the time, right? Walking to, when I did my university workshop for the first time a couple of years ago, walking there, it's like, what am I doing here? Who am I to think that I can teach this to master's students? And how can I make them listen to me, I guess. Whereas actually, I haven't had that problem with students at all. They might look a little bit surprised initially when I show up, but then they've been very respectful and very, there's never been an issue. But I launched my portfolio a few years ago, and it was picked up by Career Foundry as sort of an example of a great data visualization portfolio. So literally every single day I get messages from somebody saying, can you be my mentor? Can you teach me how to do data visualization? You're so inspiring. And it still doesn't feel that way. It still feels like, oh, I fooled them all. It's so, I don't know. I feel like maybe it's a little bit of a Dunning-Kruger effect where, the higher up you go, the more you actually realize how many talented people there are out there, and you never really stop comparing yourself to them and seeing all the great things that you could be doing.
I had a really amazing female mentor, and the one bit of advice she gave me to get over this feeling of inadequacy, or I'm not doing this right, or I'm not good enough, is write down your 3 strengths. What do you bring to the table? And always revert back to those in anything, in your interviews, in your day-to-day work, because that is self-fulfilling. Like if you always go to your strengths and you tell people these are your strengths, then it helps you build up those confidence. And then where you don't know what you're doing, I just think that's my learning opportunity. So I'm going to give myself some slack, like something that I don't know, that's not my strength, but I'm going to work with someone that is good at that, and I'm going to learn from them. And that really helped me, because I always just thought, this is what I'm not so good at. I understand I'm not so good at that. Everyone can't be good at everything, as Miriam said. So these are my strengths. This is what I bring. These are my USPs. And these are my weaknesses, and I'm going to work with someone else who doesn't have those weaknesses, so I can learn from them and build up some kind of level of ability in that area to make me feel better about the things that I find harder. And that really helped me. Going for interviews, applying for jobs, just having those 3 things in my head all the time. So yeah, and it's so simple. It's so simple, but it really resonated with me.
You mentioned applying for jobs, and it just sort of reminds me of that study that they did that showed that women are much less likely to apply for a job if they think they don't meet 100% of the criteria. And I think that just shows how much of this is probably cultural, and the way that we grow up to, I don't know, think that we have to be perfect at everything, or that we just don't have the same confidence in our skills. And I do wonder when that starts and how that is instilled in women. Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I was moving jobs and my team asked me to write a job application for or they put out a job application for my role. And I was like, I wouldn't apply for my own job. Like, I looked at it like, I don't have half those things. So yeah, and then they were like, well, how will you rewrite it? And I was like, well, exactly what you said, Naledi. If you put very specific things like you have to know this coding language and this and this and this, it's like what you really want is someone that's a quick learner, that picks things up quickly, encouraging them they can learn on the job. It's all these softer skills that are more important, and that encourages a wider pool of people to apply, not very specific technical things. So even down to a job interview, there's a description or the questions that you ask. There's so much thought that needs to go into that to make sure that you get a diverse range of people even applying.
I'm quite curious because, like, you've all mentioned in a way that other people in your journey have helped you overcome those obstacles or have said something to you that has reframed the way you think about yourself, your abilities, and what you believe to be inadequacy. So I'm quite curious to know if you could tell anybody maybe in a leadership position or someone who's in a position to champion women in the data visualization field, what do you think they should do? Like, how do you feel like people can help women feel more encouraged to apply to these jobs or to maybe go for those promotions, go for those leadership roles? What would you say?
I would just say go for it. Just go for it. Like, don't hold yourself back. Just like, what happens if you don't? You're not going to die if you don't get a job or an interview. So why not just you've got to be in it to win it. So, like, what is the worst thing that could happen? And you learn a lot through the journey, right? If you don't get the job, you learn more. You're practicing interviews by doing them. You'll get feedback on things where you haven't been successful. But yeah, try and not let the fear hold you back.
This might sound kind of negative, but I would probably say think about all the men who are less good than you who will be applying for that job.
Brilliant answer.
It is actually I think being aware of these biases that we have, I would probably go at it with psychology, and I'd find some studies and some numbers to back that up. But whenever I've negotiated salaries, I've always talked with men in my life about it, because they've sort of had that confidence and those strategies. They've been doing it all their life. They're just so used to it, where I'd say, oh, well, I already said that I might accept this and I have to do it. And they're like, no, just say you want more. Say this number. Like, oh, I can't ask for that number. Like, no, go for it. So sometimes, I think that's fine. And I think over time of doing that and seeing how they do it, I've managed to absorb some of it. But I think questioning yourself, why do I think that I can't do this? What is it really? And being realistic, is everybody who's applying for this actually going to know this? And I wrote a blog post a few years ago about, do you need to actually be a SQL expert when you know Tableau? Because it's something that is often asked for in job adverts, and you'll see people say, if you want to be an analyst, you need to first learn Python, then SQL, and then Tableau, and then Power BI. And it's just not true. And I've had 2 job offers based on my Tableau skills alone, where I didn't meet some of the other criteria, where they said, absolutely, we're going to take some time and we're going to give you time and give you support to learn SQL, right? You know the basics, but you haven't worked with it extensively. Obviously, I was honest about that in my application, and it was absolutely no problem. So I think there's more flexibility there, and sort of believing in the strengths that you have and can show, rather than only looking at things that you don't have.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I guess since we're talking about skills and qualities, what do you think are some key qualities and maybe hard skills as well, like hard and soft to get started in a career in data visualization? Obviously, you all come from different backgrounds, so I'm quite curious to see like differences in your answers there.
Shall I start? I mean, I think for me, one of the key, I guess, qualities that data visualization has kind of enabled me to cultivate is just curiosity about the world. I started as a researcher, and being interested in the things that I research has really helped me, push my work forward, because that's what motivates me. It's what motivates my readers to read whatever it is I'm working on. So yeah, being guided by interest, and being guided by curiosity, and being guided by what interests me as well, and not kind of being, I think over time I've learned to be a bit more courageous about, well, that might not be something that's necessarily going to be conventional, but if I want to do something about, I don't know, David Bowie's bass lines, then I will. And we'll turn it into a data visualization. I did a project with Valentina De Filippo, who's a fantastic information designer, a few years ago, that was called Oddity Viz, that did just that. So yeah, I guess just following your nose and being curious about the world and seeing where it leads you without feeling the need to go down a particular path.
I love that you mentioned curiosity, because I think in sort of the business intelligence world, that's often underestimated, because management or somebody will give a task and say, can you figure this out? Can you just, can you make this dashboard? And sometimes people don't question it, and sometimes they don't ask more questions. And I think one of the values of an analyst is to, maybe do what they asked you to do, but then also say, hey, while I was analyzing the data, I also found all of these other things, and I want to show you those. So curiosity, I think, is top on my list as well. The other one is sort of just logical thinking, especially if you sort of, and I think it's interesting, right? When we talk about data visualization or the data field in general, there's such a wide range of things you can do. You can be sort of a hardcore data scientist, machine learning, really be in there with your statistics and your code, or you can be a visual designer that's working in Illustrator, and you're really sort of quite far away from sort of having to deal with some of those things. But logical thinking, to be able to see a problem and figure out where it's coming from, and it's just sort of, it's a daily skill, really. So you turn on the light and the light doesn't turn on. What do, right? You go through the steps, you come up with theories and hypotheses, and then you test your theories. Say, oh, maybe the light bulb is broken, I'm going to check that out. Maybe the electricity's down, I'm going to check that out. And you go through all of these hypotheses and test them until you find the solution. And it took me a while to realize that data and analytics is much more about that sort of logical thinking than it is about maths or any sort of calculations. And then the other one, I think it's such a fast moving field. When I think when I was at university, Tableau wasn't really a thing. Flourish definitely wasn't. So I've had to, even though I was trained in Tableau, since then I've taught myself Power BI and I've taught myself Flourish, and you have to constantly stay interested in the new tools and continue to teach yourself, because the field is going to change so quickly. So being able to learn new skills on your own to stay updated with things is really important.
I mean, for me, the curiosity thing really resonates. Like I'm really sad. Like if anyone gives me a data set on anything, I want to find out what's in there. What interesting things can I find out about in there? And that actually is why it's so nice working with customers, because you just get data on all sorts of topics from all sorts of things across so many different industries. So that really, that curiosity, like finding interesting patterns, information about things that I would never normally know if someone hadn't given me the data to look through it. It kind of started my initial thing about analysis. But then the thing that really focused me on data viz, and which I've really loved, is nothing, just completely tool agnostic. What do I go through to make something understandable by someone else? Like, what are the things that I routinely do, or decisions that I make, design decisions that I make to get to a point where someone else is just as interested in my chart as I am. And that has been really like a huge journey where I've just had so many different types of data topics, and it's like, how can I boil that down to just a few key decisions and then help other people not find it intimidating to start? Like, you know, someone chucks you a spreadsheet and you're like, what do I do with this? Like, how can I help boil that down to some easy digestible steps to move people along from data and analysis into communication and storytelling. And that has been the part that I have really loved about my data viz journey. Like, how can I help other people not feel intimidated or scared by it? And that has also really helped me, because by trying to explain it to other people, I really have to boil it down or understand it. And so that kind of educational part, collaborating with other people, helping them, that really has been the bit I love the most about my job now.
Amazing. Thank you all for sharing that. So I'm getting being curious, being completely tool agnostic is just like having that logical thinking. So obviously trying to, I guess, dissect a problem and see how best to tackle it, not just follow instructions, not just follow like a set path, and then trying to simplify things, I guess, to make it more, again, digestible for people and just be an effective communicator. So I love how this is not extremely technical. It's something that anybody could do, which makes the field incredibly accessible for pretty much anybody. So thank you so much for presenting it like that. That sounds amazing. I'm curious, I mean, seeing your struggles, but also your different journeys and how you ended up in like quite different areas of the field as well. What advice would you give your younger selves, knowing everything that you've been through, maybe some of those struggles and some of those hurdles? What's something that you feel your younger self would appreciate knowing very early on your career?
I think I'd tell myself just to believe in myself more and be less critical, and definitely less perfectionist, because I've definitely let go of the perfectionism a lot more and become a lot more critical about perfectionism. And actually the data school had some great influence in that, because we were sometimes given very short time frames to create projects. So for instance, when on the day that Brexit decision was announced, and we were a group of 8 people, 4 of us are Europeans. So there was a very direct impact on us through that decision. Our trainer threw out the project that we were doing and said, okay, find data and visualize something about Brexit and then present it in 3 hours. And that really challenges you to not try to produce something of perfection, but something that is good enough for the resources that you have and the time that you have. And usually it's actually good enough even for if you had more resources. I think I would have just saved myself a lot of headaches if I'd just been a little bit less critical.
Yeah, I completely echo that as well. I also started with quite a perfectionist mindset and have learned to kind of moderate that over the years. But I think for me, the key is knowing when to put in 100% effort, when to have that real perfectionism and when not to. And, you know, if you have a constrained timeline, a constrained budget, or, you know, it's simply not required in the situation, you don't need to throw your heart and soul into absolutely every little project. I know, you know, you're supposed to, but actually you don't have to, and no one else is doing that. But on the other hand, there are projects where you might want to do that, where it's very meaningful to you, it's a very important project, or where it's a personal project that you're only doing not for any money, just for the joy of doing it, and you want it to be perfect. Then, you know, you can turn on those perfectionist guns if you've still got them. I think that's totally fine. But yeah, there is this sense, and maybe this is gender related, and I certainly have had it in the past, that you have to have absolutely every requirement on the job job list. You have to have absolutely everything perfectly right. You have to dot all the I's and cross the T's, and you just don't.
What do they say? Fake it until you make it. So,
Yeah. And the perfect is the enemy of the good. There's so many like sayings along these lines, aren't there?
yeah. I mean, my answer is quite different to this question. And if I could go back, or if I could tell my younger self something, it would be, don't hold yourself back whilst you're having children. So I had 10 years of having 3 small children, and honestly, I should have done much more in my career within those 10 years, but I was scared. Like, I worked in the public sector, I had flexible working, I had part-time working, I had small children. I think it was easy. But if I was to go back to it was easier. I had children, so it was quite hard. But if I was to go back to my younger self and say, don't worry about all these things, like just go for it. Just apply for a job if you want it. Don't think about, oh, is this going to fit with my life? Like, worry about that when you get the job, right? Worry about that if it becomes a problem. And so, I think I lost a few years and I wasn't happy in my job for those few years. And so if I could go back and tell myself, stop it, life's short, like do the things you want to do, and don't make up things that you think are going to be hard when you don't even know yet. So that would be my advice to my younger self.
I can sense the common thread of daring, right? And like not fearing, not being overly critical, allowing yourself maybe room for failure, just like for experimentation, and definitely just going for things and doing things, which I think it's good advice for anybody, not just for women, but definitely for everybody. So we have 10 minutes left. I'm going to take a quick look at the Q&A because I have spotted some questions. One of them is actually around mentorship, and I think going back into that idea of how the people that we surround ourselves can help us or can lift us up. Do you guys have any tips on how to find a mentor, or are you yourselves open to be mentors for other people? What have you undergone like a mentorship? Like, what would you say to that question?
I think I wish I had undergone a mentorship. I think it would have been really helpful for me early on. So I would definitely encourage people to go down that road. I guess I do a bit of informal mentoring where, like you said earlier, Naledi, people reach out to me and ask for help on specific things, or often students will contact me and say, could I have half an hour of your time? And I try always to give that because it's important, and they've gone to the effort of actually contacting somebody, and I admire that kind of resolve to be able to do that. So yeah, I do quite a bit of informal mentoring. Obviously, time limitations, having a small child mean I'd like to do more than I do, but I think it's really important, and I would encourage people to try and get a mentor if they can.
I mean, I've had good and bad experiences of mentorship. So I had an amazing mentor at the Bank of England, like I was explaining earlier on. She really, really helped me in putting myself out there for things. But there was a mentorship program where you get allocated someone, and that person, that they weren't the right mentor for me. I didn't get anything out of that relationship. So I think it's kind of more important to find the right mentor than to just have a mentor. And so and when you do find the right person, it can be really so helpful. So I'm always happy to talk to people, but it's worth exploring who do you think would suit you best? Like maybe someone you know a little bit, not just a random stranger. And then you would probably get more out of that mentorship than just random allocation.
I think all the mentors that I had were through work experiences and just happened quite naturally. I'd say I do get contacted a lot and I can't respond and give time to everybody. The times when I do respond is when I get a little bit more information and a little bit of indication that the person has thought about what they want out of mentorship. and they've also already done their research a little bit. So I sometimes get questions that are just one line and say, how do I become a data analyst? How do I create a portfolio? And, you know, I feel like if you just type that into Google, you'd probably get a better response than writing that to a stranger. I think the Data Visualization Society has a mentorship program. So I'd also say, you know, if you're interested in that, have a look. But as I said, I think there's a big part of having, you know, the skill for the self-directed learning if you want to go into this field. So do your own research and be very specific. If you contact somebody to say, hey, this is all the stuff that I've already done. I, you know, ran into a roadblock at this point, and now I'm looking for somebody to help me to do this very specific thing. And I think you're more likely to get a response if you do that.
Amazing.
I guess, you know, there are always also ways of, I guess, tapping into the power of the community that you don't necessarily have to have a one-to-one mentor. You know, then there's lots of this, you know, biz.social and Mastodon. There's the DVS Slack channel where if you've got a specific problem that you want to ask, or you've got feedback on a project, you can post things on there. Duncan and I run a community for sonification practitioners called Decibels, where we do a similar thing. People can share work and get feedback. So there's lots of kind of other ways other than mentorship of getting that input that you need, which can be really valuable if you're a freelancer, for example.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So we're on the last leg of the session. I guess as a parting thought, I'd ask you, again, bringing everything together. We're talking about women. We're talking about women in the workforce and specifically in data visualization. Why should more women maybe get into the data visualization field? How would you encourage women to get into the field?
I think we're always losing out if we, you know, if there's some sort of societal reason why one group of people is held back from going into a certain field or contributing to an area. And I think, to be honest, I think data visualization of all the data fields is probably the most inclusive of women and the one where we see most representation. Obviously, I encourage anybody to do it just because it's a really great field to work in. But yeah, no, I think for me, we're losing out if women who are smart and talented and would be amazing at this don't believe that they can, or are being held back by something that has nothing to do with how well they would be doing the job.
Absolutely. I mean, those women are losing out, and also data viz as a field is losing out, and everybody's losing out for that lack of talent that could be flourishing in that space.
I mean, for me, I would just, I got into this field through tools, right? I found a tool, I taught myself how to use it, and then I realized I love this field. And then I slowly realized, oh, I've been in this field since I was 18 and started economics, and that there's that thread all the way through. And so I suppose it's just carving out a bit of time to have a play around with the tools so that you can start to see what you could produce fairly easily, and that encourages you to go further and deeper. And that might be a good way just to kind of get started, but you need to preserve a bit of time to do that, to do something new, not to just get stuck in your everyday doing the same things that you always do. And that can be quite hard if you've got a busy day job, you've got family, but it's important for you to do that for yourself, like to carve out time for you to personally develop, to explore new things. And so maybe it's just something you need to build into your working week, that you and good employers will allow you to do this, right? Have half a day a week or a day a month to just explore new ideas and to experiment with things. So I would just encourage maybe starting off small, playing around with a user-friendly tool, and slowly building that up if you decide that you're very interested in the field and it's piqued your interest enough.
I mean, thank you so much for your insights. Again, just to bring everything together, curiosity, daring to test tools, daring to work on projects, daring to just push forward, even push back, building community, surrounding yourself with people that nurture you and allow you to grow. That all sounds like really, really good advice to me. So I hope that everybody tuning in feels something similar. That's the conversation. Now I'm going to share my screen again to share a couple of useful resources from the Flourish side. So let me just read that. Oop. There we go. Brill. Again, thank you so much for that insight. So we on the Flourish blog did publish a blog around data surrounding International Women's Day, so about gender parity and which areas we're doing great at, which areas we're not doing so good at. So do take a look if you're interested more in the topic of equality or inequality and how we're performing as a society. It really fits into a lot of the topics that we covered here. We didn't specifically talk about it, but we have charts on female representation, on leadership positions in different areas. We have topics like the motherhood penalty, which we didn't cover specifically, but Lyndsey mentioned it with, balancing work and balancing your personal life, as well as perhaps motherhood and children. So do take a look at that. That's it from us. Thank you so much to everybody who joined. And once again, thank you so much to our lovely guests for taking part on our very first panel and for sharing their insights, for sharing their expertise, and for just giving us their time and their valuable